Good morning. Good morning. My name is Vernon Mitchell Jr. I am the curator for Popular American Arts and Culture at Washington University in St. Louis, and I'm also the administrative lead for the Documenting the Now project funded by the generous support of the Andrew Mellon Foundation. I would like to welcome you to St. Louis and to Ferguson. We're excited about the symposium, Digital Blackness in the Archive. Documenting the Now is a 2-year grant dedicated to supporting scholarly use and preservation of social media content. DocNow should be considered a suite of tools as well as a community developed around supporting the ethical collection, use, and preservation of social media content. This grant is a collaborative effort between Washington University in St. Louis, the Maryland Institute of Technology and the Humanities at the University of Maryland, and the University of California, Riverside. I want to thank my colleagues Burgess Jules and Ed Summers for their outstanding work to this point. It has been a great pleasure working with them since we've been together. I would also like to thank my fellow Washington University Library colleagues, Stephanie Bimberg, Jody Ventori, Diana Bell, Associate University Librarian for Special Collections, Nadia Gossedy, and the Vice Provost and University Librarian, Denise Stevens, for their continued support. As we enter the last phase of this collaboration, we're holding this symposium to hopefully aid in future directions around the work, appraisal, collection, access, preservation, and the use of social media and other web-based content that documents Black lives. Here at the Ferguson Municipal Library, we figured this was the best place to begin to continue the conversation. DocNow is not the end of a conversation, it is the beginning, a continuation of a conversation and engagement. And if I were to speak for my colleagues, I think that DocNow was, in the terms of being a community, was a place where we weren't siloed off, right? IT professionals, academicians, archivists, library professionals, activists, all in the same room, having a conversation at the same time. So this is why we're here, and this is what we hope to gain from this. Just as another note, I would say we're also sponsoring a screening of the acclaimed documentary about the Ferguson Uprising, Whose Streets, this evening at 6 p.m. at Brown Hall in room 100. The second day of the conference will take place at the McGinnis Classroom in Bauer Hall, back on the Danforth campus at Washington University. So on behalf of DocNow, our team, I want to thank you and welcome you. Now I'll turn it over to Scott Bonner, the director of the Ferguson Public Library, and we thank him again for allowing us to be in this space. Welcome.
I want to welcome you all to Ferguson. In 2014, we were overwhelmed. I was painfully aware that we're in a historical moment. And I, as a librarian, felt a special need to preserve and document. Again, right? Many times we have people in historical situations where they didn't record what was going on. We have all these 40-long documents. Well, we were that. We were unable to even begin reporting what's going on the street, what's going on social media, what's going on anywhere. And it is, thanks to documenting now similar projects that we have any meaningful record that will have. You are very good at that. We were totally overwhelmed in 2014. We're a little overwhelmed now because so much material is exposed that we're trying to meet. Just wanted to give you a little bit of what we're doing right now, which is we're trying to identify needs of patrons and meet them like every library everywhere does, right? So, huge need for early literacy. Have trouble bringing people into the library for programs because they're also so busy. So we've taken the programs out. Our children's librarian goes out to daycares, public schools, private schools, whatever, and does story times out in the community. We have kids that are thirsty for the opportunity for technology and science, and so, you know, we did a first Lego League team this year. Lots of race book club. I thank you all very much for being able to pick up the pieces we couldn't pick up in tracking what really mattered and what happened in 2014. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Leon Blackness. I'm a University Archivist at Kent State, and I have the wonderful pleasure of introducing Dr. Marissa Parham. Marissa Parham is Professor of English at Amherst College and directs the Immersive Reality Lab for the Humanities, which is a work group for digital and experimental humanities. She also serves as a Faculty Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Her current teaching and research projects focus on texts and technologies that problematize assumptions about time, space, and bodily materiality. She is particularly interested in how such terms share a history of increasing complexity in texts produced by African Americans, and how they also offer ways of thinking about intersectional approaches to digital humanities and technology studies. Marissa Parham holds a PhD in English and Comparative Literature from Columbia University and is the author of Haunting and Displacement in African American Literature and Culture, The African American Student's Guide to College, and is the co-editor of Theorizing Glissant, Cites and Citations. She currently serves on the Board of Directors for the Massachusetts Foundation for the Humanities and formerly served on the founding Board of Directors for the Amherst Cinema Arts Center. She is also a former director of the Five Colleges College Digital Humanities Initiative, serving Amherst, Hampshire, Mount Holyoke and Smith Colleges, and the University of Massachusetts and Amherst. So if you could please welcome me in welcoming Marissa Parham to the podium. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. So I was sitting there. Can you hear me okay? And you all can hear me okay? And I realized this is that hilarious moment of me being over here and the computer being over there. So we're going to have some hilarious walking around moments. I promise you I'm not like lost and wandering, but that's kind of what it's going to look like. And I'm sure this is that problem too where for me, so much of the point of being here is to sort of be here with you guys. But of course, it's also being recorded, so I apologize in advance. I'm doing everything wrong in terms of being recorded, beginning with turning my back. While I get this back up, I put it down because it seemed like I didn't want you all sitting here having to stare at it, but now I see that was the wrong choice, and it has to load for a second. So there'll be some stuff up on the screen. It's a little bit bright in here, but hopefully you guys will be able to see it. And it's not a huge deal. I just tend to put quotes up just to be helpful because it's hard when people are reading and like, what are they saying and what's the quote, you know? So it's literally just stuff like that. So it's more for reference. So it shouldn't be a stressful thing at all. Okay. it shouldn't be a stressful thing at all if you can't see it, because again, it's just there for reference, and hopefully, yes, my clicker loves me. So I think we'll be okay at the long distance. So the talk I'm giving today, the conversation I want to have, and that's how I think of as talks. I was looking at the program for this event, and I was thinking about, because so many of you are sort of activists, researcher, programmer, designer, archivist types, many of you in the work you're doing is very like, you get in there and you get it done. Yes, I just summarized your whole life work as you get in there and you get it done. But I think that's actually incredibly important. And what I wanted to offer today are simply a series of considerations that help pull out some of the other stuff underlying the stuff we're talking about, because it's actually really difficult. And I'm someone who works on sort of like the programming and code side of things, but also the literary history side of things. And I'm always aware of how much and how difficult it is to get those conversations going at the same time. And so I'm going to lean a little bit more to the sort of concept, evocation, invocation side, simply because I want you guys to have a way to, again, just more languages, right, to pull out what you already have. And I was thinking, the subtitle of this talk, I call it Sample Signal Strobe. I feel like the subtitle is the internet giveth and the internet taketh away. And an example of this, that's the whole talk. Actually, we can go home now. It's really true, though. And I'm really kind of obsessed with this. How on the one hand, particularly social media, can be such a distressing space in which to experience our lives, but at the same time, it gives so many people life. And really thinking about that and just taking that really actually seriously. I do think sometimes when thinking about social media, we are a little bit on the academic side at a deficit, because we do have to push against the ways in which historically it's taken academia a long time to catch up with understanding why the internet's important, frankly. And if you couple that, in our case, with thinking about why Black life is important, whoa, right? We have a lot of ground to cover. And so I was thinking about, and this is sort of a little bit out of order, because what I've done is take different pieces of other talks that I've given to groups of people who do programming, people who do archival work, people, and I've sort of wanted to remix it for this group that actually covers all of the above. But I was thinking about this quote I saw online the other day. This is Alexis Madrigal, who writes for Fusion, writes for Atlantic Monthly, writes on tech in general. And he had this really interesting sort of piece. It was very short, and I thought it was interesting. And he was talking about how there's a way in which, when we think about how we define ourselves in today's world, so much of this can also go to defining yourself in relation to a technology. Right? So, you know, I still think of, like, you know, Erykah Badu's like analog girl in a digital world. For me, I think of like the ways in which I've embraced so much of digital technology, but part of me is still very cassette oriented. Even in my talk today, I'm talking about sampling, I'm talking about remixes, I'm talking about mixtapes, and the way I've constructed this talk is sort of as a theoretical mixtape. It's an actual thing for me. It's not like a nicety. It's actually how I think. And he has this other point in this, and also thinking about how these technologies are changing so quickly now that, of course, we have to think of them as sort of slices of time. So you can't, you know, I can say I'm a cassette girl and be talking about like 25 years of my life, whereas now you can say I'm an MP3 girl and you're talking about a couple of years, maybe a couple of months. Like, so what does that mean? But we're going to put that aside. I was just really interested in this notion. He's talking about the pleasure. This is the second paragraph. That's my shit. You know, yeah, cassettes. You're like, word up, right? And like, that's your thing. But then he had this other point that I thought was really beautiful and that I do want to dwell on today. This is towards the bottom. And yet you share something real with the other people who understand, like really understand one of these moments. And no one else can join the club. It can't be looked up on Wikipedia or gathered from Google or glimpsed in a YouTube video. You can't buy that experience on Etsy or eBay or even the weirdest vintage place in all of Oakland. You had to be a body in a place in a culture. you had to be there. And so in thinking about the digital and thinking about the archival and thinking about events and uprisings, thinking about the place of the body, some bodies that are present on the ground, I think being here today, for which I'm just so grateful to be here today in Ferguson, and thinking about it as a specific place with a specific history, with specific bodies on the ground that have specific terror enacted against them, that also have specific pleasures, specific ways of doing things, favorite sandwiches, favorite beverages, and so on and so forth. There's an experience, is what I'm getting at, of living in the world, right? That's attached to place. That the digital, in the same time, amplifies this out, right? So on the one hand, you're thinking of living in the world, but also thinking about the ways in which your experience of the world also crosses all these other ideas of other worlds as well. So I'm going to try and move quickly today through a lot of material. And so part of that, for me, means a lot of reading. And I'm just reading to move quickly, so there's some time, hopefully, to talk or to talk later. I was also thinking about another Alexis Madrigal piece that goes alongside this, and this was a longer piece that came in, I think, last week, by the way, in Atlantic Monthly. It's really interesting for this group, by the way. And it's talking about how, in the future, historians are going to struggle to be able to write histories of the internet because so many of the technologies that drive the internet, you know, the actual softwares, like Facebook, for instance, are black boxes. And so there's a way in which the idea of archiving and producing historical knowledge about our today as a past has already been problematized by proprietary knowledges. And that's underlying this as well, this talk I'm giving today. And so if you think about that, right, and then you also think about the ways in which our bodies are themselves also archives of technologies, right? So I'm interested in the ways in which the technological writ large, the quote, internet, software, Twitter, Facebook, social media platforms are themselves black boxes, but also how we're kind of black boxes too, and thinking about the place of our experiences in all of this. That was very vague, but hopefully I'll make it more clear. Underlying this is a conference we had at Amherst College a few weeks ago called Digital Africas, which brought together people working on the African continent on digital stuff. And one of the participants, Kaguru, made this amazing point talking about, just sort of in passing, about how anytime you have a group of people together, particularly if you're thinking about people from marginalized communities, anytime you gather those people to talk about their experiences, you're creating an archive. You're also simultaneously experiencing an archive, which always makes me think of, I wrote this recently, of James Baldwin in Sonny's Blues. He has this beautiful scene of children sitting at twilight and are listening to their elders tell all these terrible stories about the day. But of course, the elders are kind of talking in code, right? They're not like being explicit, like, oh, you know how that woman at work is, right? And how the kids are just laying there and absorbing it. And how that act of absorption is their experience of archival knowledge that even they themselves as children can't fully access until much later in their lives. They won't understand it till it happens to them. But when it happens to them, they have been already given the tools to process this thing. Even at the time of acquisition, it was obscure to them, right? So again, that's the kind of stuff I want to think about. Taking together, I argue, this offers us also a way of thinking about the importance of knowing how to talk about our experiences, both quantitatively and qualitatively. A lot of the work of Doc Now is doing right now is helping us develop rigorous practices around collecting and archiving, and also at gatherings like this with community members, activists, scholars, thinking about the ways in which every part of the process has to be brought together in order to be a check on another part of the process. We produce our own checks and balances. And thinking about the sort of intellectual and emotional rigor that comes with that, but also the kind of affective work that includes, to make sure that work is done right and that it's done in ways that both honor and expand the moments that call us into action. Though by no means marking new fields of inquiry, developing multiple pathways and understanding how technological formations mediate communication within and across Black communities carries renewed urgency, both as we look for ways to historicize and conceptualize phenomena like Black Twitter, and also, of course, with the rise of social media activism, for instance, the Black Lives Matter movement. Such work is particularly interesting when set alongside dominant narratives characterizing the digital divide, especially in terms of African Americans. For while it is critically important to assure that African Americans have seats at the financial, intellectual, creative, and technical tables that constitute the tech industry, it is also concerning that there are so many narratives around Black technological deficit, but seldom acknowledgement of the wave of Black technological accomplishment. This is especially striking in light of how quickly Black communities have been shown to adopt and adapt the affordances of new technologies. Indeed, in regards to thinking about social media technologies, Black youth are so much at the cutting edge that you sometimes wonder if they're ahead of the technologies themselves, gifting the world with a present that many people otherwise only imagine as the future. What would it mean to take this perception seriously? What kinds of critical structures might be distilled from thinking about technological adoption as itself a kind of Black cultural practice? What might it mean to articulate the digital as endemic to African American experience, even if so doing means resetting the timeline for when we imagine the technical emergence of digital technologies? The method of the talk I'll be giving today is one of speculative frameworking, the purpose of which is to distill a critical approach that takes seriously the belief that our scholarship is especially right place for modeling livable futures for people on the ground, for people invested in using hardware and software to recover, center, or thematize the lives of marginalized communities. Social media is important to this inquiry because it's been so heavily used by African Americans for most of its short lifespan. It's also important because social media experience can be productively understood as technically parallel to complex matters of cultural ownership, transmission, and participation in African American culture. So to be clear, what I'm saying is that it's not important to think about the digital in terms of Black life because it makes Black life much more interesting to think about, like, ooh, the digital, because we do still a category called ooh, the digital, in the world in general. But that there's something endemic or inherent to diasporic experience itself that reproduces some of the technical structure of what we otherwise call the digital. So just to be clear, I want us thinking in both directions. For the way I'm using it, and I move quite quickly between them, but I'm using the digital as a metaphor, but also not a metaphor at all, as descriptive. My talk today is thinking about the various kinds of social, cultural, and emotional labor accomplished by people's use of Twitter hashtags. This inquiry was motivated by the prominent role Twitter played in public discourse in the wake of numerous brutality cases against African Americans in the United States, perhaps most prominently beginning with the murder of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in Florida in 2012, and really solidifying its place in the spotlight in 2014 in Ferguson. In working with software, for instance, the DocNow stuff that lets you work with the Twitter API, my research team became interested in how we might characterize what emerged for us as the difference between Twitter as a data set and Twitter as an experience. There's a tension between the notational, metric, countable aspects of Twitter, the data we associate with individual utterances, and the sweeping, constant, human-generated meaningfulness for which those utterances, or to which those utterances were to contribute. Right? On the one hand, Twitter is absolutely nothing but software. It's the most software of software, right? But the feelings of it, right, that it elicits and how that works with software and also remakes the software is what's interesting to me. I'm interested then in sort of the interactions between data per se and the often mysterious waves of voice, performance, and gesture in social media, and how this puts particular and significant pressure on working with the social media archive. Despite the immense amounts of metadata attached to a tweet, the significance of much of a tweet's data is lost once the circumstance of a tweet's appearance passes away. As well as Tanisha Taylor, Burgess Jules, and others have noted in their work with developing social media archives in the wake of Ferguson, the presentist orientation of tweeting, the thing you say now in order to get the thing said, the thing done in the moment, problematizes the very idea of archival work. For instance, when tweeters want to delete their tweets after an event is passed. What does it mean for us to want to keep them? My team was especially interested in a series of emotionally captivating data visualizations that have been circulating in popular media in the wake of the 2014 protests against racial violence here in Ferguson. Created by S. Rogers and distributed in the online edition of the Daily Mail, a London newspaper, this interactive heat map allowed viewers to watch Twitter users wait for and respond to the Ferguson grand jury's November 2014 decision on whether or not to indict Darren Wilson. So, and I've talked about this before, but I think it's worth showing it again. I'll scooch around and have to come back. Let me find my map. You just had a whole preview of the whole thing for a map that's not here at all. This is the part where I have to go back to the computer, I guess, and turn my back. But it's worth it. Trust me, it's worth it. So in thinking about this, there's also someone else's computer, so this is going to be hilarious. But in thinking about this and sort of thinking about the ways in which, watch this, we're going to use the internet. We're just going to go right around this problem. I feel like there's rules about things you do in presentations, and this is everything you don't do. But this is the map I want you looking at. And this way also it'll get us a place where we can play a little bit with it as well. What was interesting about this to me, if it will go, is thinking about how, on the one hand, you have an experience, if you're here in Ferguson, of being here, in all the intense feelings someone like me imagines that elicits, whether you're participating on the streets or not. The imagination, of course, and I think it's reasonable, is that you're in a world of feeling. Everything is feeling. And we know that how this works. So this is also that moment where things are so intense, you're walking along, you stub your toe, and you're like, I'll kill you toe, right? It's too much, and everything is that feeling of too much. And so alongside that then, there's also this sense of other people participating at the same time. And so what this map does that's so interesting, and this is what I want to look at for a moment, is that it looks at or asks us to sort of think about what other people who are not on the moment or not in the moment are also doing. It's like we're blocking your flash. That's fine. So what you see in this map, therefore, is sort of the ways in which every time someone tweets, you get a flare. And I'm really interested in the movement of those flares and thinking about what's at stake and thinking about the distance between this feeling of the whole world watching and this notion that if you're present in the space, you're not watching, you're participating. So also, what is the difference, therefore, between watching and presentation? It seems very basic, like, duh, they're different. But I think there's something there that we have to think a little bit differently now that we're working in the world of social media, where it's not just even sitting and watching TV, it's participating, it's tweeting, it's retweeting, it's looking up information, it's calling your friends. It's a sort of whole body experience that I think is something a little bit different, and that's what I'm getting at. By visualizing social media data, hashtags, geolocation, and timestamps, the map was able to concretize the sense that the whole world was indeed watching. And this used heat mapping as a tool for visualizing a single data point, a hashtag, and displaying it across several dimensions simultaneously: time, location, and frequency. Each instance of tweeting is marked on the map. A point of light indicates its location. The lively or animated quality of the map is accomplished by including time as an axis of experience. Marking different tweets incrementally across a span of time makes it seem as if the light points are seething and throbbing, as users' different moments of interaction become aesthetically connected, producing a sense of temporal continuity. Just as the map's flickering lights amplify users' simple acts of tweeting as phenomena of appearance, so you tweet and you appear on the map. The increasing numbers of users across the map and the increase in tweeting activity produce an effect wherein to participate is to give off a spark. Indeed, in the daily news map, the animation increases as people are waiting for the news. The first one is captioned buzzing, and then as you see more and more of these nodes of light appear, it says internet on fire. By foregrounding some of the Twitter metadata that otherwise would go unnoticed by an average participant, the Daily Mail visualization uses what you do not see in order to visualize what you might feel in such a moment of high observational participation. Despite being generated out of data, The value of its effect is mainly in the metaphorical resonance, in how it produces a sense of affective dimensionality by transforming basic data coordinates, again, hashtag time and location, into a representation of the world's the flaring of the world's participation in a political moment. But even as it represents the world on fire, the origin of the participation mapped in the Daily Mail visualization is the factual ubiquity of Black Death. For many people, every day, the world is indeed on fire. In this way, the subordination of content in the map's aesthetic effect can also be read as an apt representation of the serial nature of Michael Brown's death, as the event of his death, of course, carried the specific importance of his human life, but also communicated his status as one of many Black children killed by police in the United States. If Rogers' map uses what one does not see in order to visualize what one might feel in such a moment of high participation, understanding Brown's death as one of many also transmits an affective meaningfulness in excess of particular content, what Catherine McKittrick has referred to as the list, the breathless numbers, the absolutely economic, the mathematics of the unliving. Qualitatively encoded in understanding the impact of Brown's death is the reiteration of a quantitative reality. Brown dies, and I think, again. The mathematics of the unliving is an historical metadata that produces a sense of resonance beyond a discrete moment, producing a memory that circulates without origin. In moments of such experience, content and ownership are subordinated to haunting resonance and uncanny circulation. At some point, you don't care always where the tweets are coming from. The act of retweeting, right, doesn't interesting thing to authorship. What gives it meaning is the repetition itself, right? Accounting for how Black life requires the capacity to constantly index Black death and the interspatial cross-temporal processes this instantiates helps us to conceptualize the digital dimensionality of Black diasporic life. So now I want to pivot a bit and think about this as a kind of sampling, and haunting and sampling in the digital. Writing the instability between to, from, or for is a way of characterizing the haunted nature of Black life, as a way of articulating what it means to experience other people's memories with the affective impact of personal first-hand experience. This is a way of thinking about that moment of hearing of a death of a Black man and saying, again. I call this haunting, which is a term I use to describe how memories might circulate without proper origin. For instance, how one person might remember another person's experience as if it were her own. In the name of movement and transmittability, the digital sacrifices any easy sense of origin, again, to sort of retweets, the remix. But set free to circulate, at every instance of its emergence, the digital potentially, or the digital signal potentially reproduces something often just as important as origin. Other people's memory combined with one's own, the sample. It is the pleasure and pain of the signal. It is the again. If I'm alone and I hear this news and I say again and I suffer, when I'm in community and I hear this news and I say again, the chorus rises up and says yes again, right? So thinking about what happens in those moments, the signal, the sample, the remix. From this perspective, movement, once signifying loss itself, also becomes the site of recuperation, even if it comes without restoration. And then sort of think of these tweets moving around and moving around. Indeed, much as early DJs used 2 analog turntables to disaggregate songs so that it might be used as if they were digital, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're taking analog, right, and you're making it behave as if it were digital. This is one of the ways I make the argument of thinking about Black popular culture as sort of digital before digital caught up, right? We were making digital things before we had digital technologies. But yes, so DJs used 2 turntables as if they were digital so they could make new things, and these new things could be made to resonate with continually receding past, the sample. Black life harkens to the digital because Black diasporic existence is a digitizing experience. transfer, migration, metonymy, the break, the remix, in tracing the multiple and continual experiences of forced migration and violence endemic to Afro-diasporic life in the Americas, the Middle Passage, the auction block, the Great Migration, segregation, we begin to see how the digitality, as a generative lens through which to understand African American cultural production. Much as we often use the word ghost as a catch-all for that which is generated in the breaks between the evidential and ephemeral, thinking about haunting as a kind of digital experience helps us to get the circulation of memory, pain, and affect on social media platforms. From this perspective, digitality can be understood as describing mechanisms by which other people's experiences emerge and reemerge across separated, discrete times and spaces. It is also a way of characterizing the haunted nature of Black life. Thinking again about what it means to witness other people's lives with the affective dimensionality of first-person experience. On the one hand, I can critique the map I had up of people around the world who aren't there simply responding. But what I like about that map and its flaring is it does transmit the sense of how deep that response nonetheless is. Again, how do we take seriously this difference between presence and witnessing, while at the same time being sure to understand that this is also a new kind of witnessing that's far closer to presence than what we've had before. I know that's vague, but this is what I'm just trying to get at, and sort of like putting a lot of words around as a way of thinking about it. One way I'm thinking about this in terms of haunting is thinking about the problem of things that we imagine as emerging through us or against us, things that can happen with us or without us. Are these feelings coming from the inside or coming from the outside? Do I feel this way because of a thing I saw, or do I feel this way because of something about me? A social media feed is almost always displaced from the time and space of a given user's embodied present. A timeline is a software expression of a person's clicking, reading, pausing, returning, liking, and sharing. We talk about the digital as if it were embodied, disembodied, but it has, or it needs, our eyes, our ears, our hands, our postures, our gestures, our breath. Social media and the digital, the interface is nothing without our bodies. We talk about digital experiences as ethereal, but they are fundamentally earthly. Much of this results from social media technology's special effects. So again, thinking of the heat map and the way the lights burn and flicker in and out. Because they move backward through time, literally taking down the screen, the visual timelines through which most social media platforms are experienced give the illusion that the life of an utterance passes away as it moves away. But even as we take seriously the passing away into old news, the taking away of tweets down the timeline, it might be worthwhile to account for social media accretion, for the life and ongoing effect of the social media past. What are some strategies for thinking about these pasts? Or, more precisely, how do we reconcile a sense of the contemporary social media timeline as ephemeral and keyed to a data present, while also attending to how our bodies hold, resonate with, and respond to accretion, the accumulation of the past? I'm thinking of myself and so many others who, at very set intervals at this point, have to take social media breaks, right? So I'm thinking about the walk away. So literally thinking about what's accreting in the body, right? We have a technological narrative that's about the ticking of the timeline and the ephemeral and the way things pass, right? You miss stuff. It's in the past. It has to be dug back out. It's the archival. But the body doesn't experience it that way at all. The body experiences even things that recede into the past as nonetheless reemergence and repetition. So we're resolving, again, this dialectic. For if we accept that social media participation is also an embodied relationship, then it follows that the data present might not necessarily square with the body's drive to remember. Indeed, while we understand how the depths of individuals are entered into this vast circulation of feeling, and understand Black death as a mathematics, as McKittrick puts it, how do we also cope with the specificity of our own bodily experiences? And as well, if you recall where I began this talk with the Alexis Madrigal, this is a way of thinking about the black box problem. Not only does the black box describe a challenge for interpreting the technical workings of the internet in a historical framework, an archival framework, but it also describes the difficulties we have with processing and describing and living with the onslaught of information, which in my own work, again, I talk about as haunting, and which Christina Sharp has more recently characterized as living in the wake. In On Seeing Through Twitter, Jeffrey Morrow notes that even as a rhetorical framing of the digital and digital experience rightfully focuses on disembodiment and accelerationism, it is important to register other kinds of digital experience. One might argue that for contemporary African Americans, quote, social media over-concretizes lives in ways that bodies can't sustain, end quote. Morrill goes on to discuss the writer Webb Smith's description of dealing with the constant specter of Black death on Twitter. It's worth repeating here. That's a nice, I want to say repeating, keep saying retweeting. Twitter, quote, Twitter is suffering because it is the most accurate reflection of American society today. It's not just what's tweeted, it's what isn't tweeted. Each day, a new hashtag represents a dead child. Often there's a film murder attached. Often still, we must watch it. Again, social media is on the one hand absolutely concrete. When you post a tweet, you're doing a material thing, a material process, and a material trace. But that doing is immediately also key to a time, a moment which will soon pass. At the same time, the experience of the moment of composing or reading or sharing does not in fact pass. It remains. Each day, a new hashtag. On the one hand, Smith's observation comports with the sense of the timeline that marches on through time. At the same time, each day, a new hashtag represents a dead child, also keens and mourns as times march forward is experienced as repetition, as entrapment in historical past of racial violence that refuses to pass. In instilling in us a certain sense of time, and in localizing that specific experience of time to specific platforms with distinctive interfaces, social media consolidates its status as a site wherein we materially experience the localization of social and affect forces. Social media, in other words, is also a place. So I'm interested in this and thinking about signals and thinking about how we send these messages. And I want to use a more, not positive narrative, but narrative of thinking about, again, I've sort of dipped, because I have to, into thinking about the pain, but thinking about how the possibility of that pain brings a possibility of its own recuperation because it's a way of communicating. In the longer version of this, I think a lot about how so many Black communities in the Americas had to develop ways to communicate under duress. And so another way of thinking about digital compression is thinking about encoding and thinking about the ways in which signals are sent in ways that it's important that make it possible to communicate out in the open so that the people you're communicating in front of don't know what you're saying. Right? I don't know why I just had a vision of it. And so I talk, for instance, about how so much of this becomes gestural. It's the wink. It's the smirk. It's the, right? As in the meeting of the day, someone said something and someone went, I heard it was so great because I couldn't see the other person. This person, unnamed person, said a thing that may or may not, I think, okay, it was crazy. You're like, what are you even talking about? People, what? Right? And I hear this in the back, I hear this, and that was everything. Because I was like, phew, I'm not the crazy one. He's crazy, you know? So it was like this small witness way off in the corner somewhere. But all I needed was that tiniest little sound. And for most of the people in the room, they didn't even hear anything. They probably just thought someone like had like hiccuped or was like, but it wasn't, it was, right? And that difference is everything. And so I'm really interested in how those little gestural moments compress all this meaning and how we use that to send signals to each other under duress. And that's an example. We weren't under duress, but that's an example of how this stuff, let me be clear. Let me not overextend like my department meeting. But it's a way, like, ooh, bring it down a notch. But it's simply a way of thinking about how communities have produced cultural formations out of the circumstances of duress, and they carry still some of those properties, right? The secretiveness, right? I can imagine someone be like, why did you just go, what does that even mean? And the person's like, right? You wouldn't even respond. You respond to like the inquiry about with a right? You would never say it. And the you would never say it is the interesting part. So anyway, thinking about this, and so thinking about how these sort of individual expressions also support repetitions of some other kinds of knowing. You can only understand a signal as such if you know what it looks like, what it sounds like. I'm also interested in how signals often pick up the kind of constant and intense wordplay at the heart of African American signifying traditions, traditions that carry structural similarities to the folksonomic quality of user-generated social media metadata, what we call hashtags. Folksonomy, I should have put it up. So it's like folksonomy is a term Twitter developer Chris Messina used to describe the functionality of social media hashtags, a neologism especially useful to discussion when put alongside Barbara Christian's foundational description of Black theorizing. Now I'm realizing I left my clicker over here. That's why I'm not showing you any of these things. But one thing that's really useful, I think, in the Christian, I'll skip ahead a little bit, which I'll read, I just think it's really useful. So I'm thinking about this idea of hashtags and thinking about what Christian describes as the ways in which Black people so much enjoy the theoretical and the conceptual, and how I think this is really important for thinking about the idea of signal making. And she's really into, she says, particularly for Black women, this notion of pithy language that unmasks the power relationships of their world, right? The way you say that one thing. And it's not just that you're saying, so this is up here. So it's not just that you're saying that one thing, but also that in saying that one thing, it actually unmasks an entire structure, blooms around it, right? For people of color, I've always theorized about how these forms are so different. I won't read the whole thing. And then I like this towards the bottom. And women, at least the women I grew up around, continuously speculate about the nature of life through pithy language that unmasks the power relationships of their world. My folk, in other words, have always been a race for theory, though more in the form of the hieroglyph, a written figure which is both sensual and abstract, both beautiful and communicative. So thinking about the hashtag as that hieroglyph, right? And the ways hashtags immediately pull together information, pull together meaning, and allow that sort of quick movement of witnessing and the digital repetition and signal sending over and over again. I'm also thinking alongside this about Jessica Johnson's claim about, and this almost gets to Kaguro's sense of every time you have a gathering, you have an archive, right? Christian's articulation can be set productively alongside Jessica Marie Johnson's description of what it means to work in archival spaces from a simultaneously Black and digital perspective, in which she emphasizes how the digital influences her, quote, understanding of how to read sources and how people in the past and present are engaged with each other, and how to read into things that are more ephemeral, like moments in which we laugh, in which language changes, and the shorthand languages that we use among each other that define who is kin, friend, or enemy. Those moments or spaces that are more ephemeral are both analogous of social media spaces and also the ways and moments that diasporic Black folk have played in the fragments of the archives. A hashtag's meaning is made in a moment of its use, even as communicative power comes out of the fact of other people's uses. As a kind of sampling, the temporality of that use is in the present of user innovation, even as the power of that innovation simultaneously depends on how that use harkens to a shared understanding of the past, expressed in riffs and improvisations like those associated with urban legend. As Patricia Turner reminds us, textual circulation in Black communities has historically been as much about the why, how, and when of dissemination as it is about the text isolatable message or denotation. So I feel like in the right moment, if something's going on in the news or something else, I could probably produce a hashtag called and my whole tweet could be the hashtag and people might know would retweet and like, what are we even talking about? And we're like, what are you even talking about? And you just look and you go, right? So this is a way in which the form is as important as the content, right? And the fact of the repetition becomes the message. When thinking about heavily circulated texts, Turner tells us it's more useful to look to, quote, what in the text themselves or in the circumstance of their dissemination gave them life and made African Americans willing to incorporate them into their repertoires, rather than imagine that text carries significant meaning beyond the need to transmit it. Turner's work helps us see how the very fact of the repetition itself communicates. Have you seen this? Have you heard about this? How much time do I have? How are we on time, Bridget? I wanted to give another example. Can I give you all an example of this? I think a good example of this, I was thinking about this recently and thinking about the form and structure of this and thinking about the Kanye West moment. I had an experience, you're like, which one, right? Well, this is hilarious because I was like thinking, but I was also trying to like read you all, but not read you all as an audience. You had an experience of teaching last semester where I mentioned the Kanye the first moment around Hurricane Katrina. But it was the same moment because I started talking, and this is where I showed my age. I was going on with the Kanye West moment in the host. This class of like 50 students, and they're like, "Why is she talking?" And they were all like comparing, like, she's talking, and they had like a long list of what I was possibly talking about, you know. And although we had been talking about Hurricane Katrina, so I felt like I had made the connection, but I kind of hadn't because one, there were so many, but two, also simply because that one had sort of faded for them. Right, so that was more the point, right? But I'm actually can't. I'm using my black privilege. I'm blushing. I'm still thinking about this moment. But I think it's a really good example because it's a sense of the ways in which this notion of this sort of black fidelity and facility with language to produce sort of forms that are amenable to digital transmission. For me, in many ways, that moment of Hurricane Katrina, the telethon, George Bush doesn't care about black people, is a first sort of hashtag or sort of meme moment, right? And so really thinking about what it did. And in the longer piece, I talk about the ways it became sampled in songs and in emails, and right? So all these transmissions. And the timing of it was also really interesting too, in the way it came after the Janet Jackson 2004 Super Bowl malfunction, which we know is why we have YouTube. It's literally the reason we're given for why YouTube was created, so that people could watch the malfunction. Right, which is 2004, and then you have the relief telethon in 2005, and then the Gina 6 case in 2006, which I also read as that sort of transition from black radio to black social media was in that moment. So thinking about that, so that's the configuration, just to give you a little bit of background that I'm thinking about. But I was thinking again also about, again, to go back to signals for a second. From the outside, a signal appears to be disconnected from the terms of a common reality, literally emerging out of anywhere and out of nowhere. Why are you making that sound? Why are you sucking your teeth? What's even happening? The glances and winks, without proper transmission or without proper receipt, are reduced to facial tics, weird sounds. The crystallizing statement becomes non sequitur, ungrammatical. I think this is really interesting for thinking about the West because there's a way in which the suddenness of George Bush doesn't care about black people really marks this, and it's really in here. Looking back at the footage, I'm struck by how terrified West looks. Hands in pockets, trying not to sway, he seems trapped between impatience and dread. I imagine West is unnerved by his own reading about black suffering from a teleprompter at a mainly white event, and trying to think about the space of his own intervention. Suddenly, as if coming to his own awareness of the situation, West goes off script. I'm going to reread it just to bring it back for you guys. And the videos are all kind of jankety, and it takes a little while for them to get going, so I'm just going to read it. He begins by responding to the force of the irony of his own situation, his own complicity as someone who identifies with the victims, but who is also simultaneously merely an onlooker. West then proceeds to string across other such ironies, producing an associative sequence. The sequence is long, but worth repeating. I hate the way they portray us in the media. You see a black family, it says they're looting. You see a white family, it says they're looking for food. And you know, it's been 5 days because most of the people are black. And even for me to complain about it, I would be a hypocrite because I've tried to turn away from the TV because it's too hard to watch. I've been shopping before even giving a donation. So now I'm calling my business manager right now to see what is the biggest amount I can give. And just to imagine if I was down there. And those are my people down there. In his statement, West calls out the criminalization of black people in media representation and immediately ties that representation to the slowness of federal response to Katrina. He then turns to himself, explicitly connecting his sense of complicity to his status as an onlooker, a consumer of media. He then shifts from complicity with the onlookers to identification with the victims. Those are my people down there, he says. West ends with a call to action, even as he himself continues to slip uncomfortably between populations, speaking both for the watcher and for the watched, trying in real time to move from onlooker to witness. He continues. So anybody out there who wants to do anything that we can help, with the way America is set up to help the poor, the black people, the less well-off, as slow as possible. I mean, the Red Cross is doing everything they can. We already realize a lot of people that could help are at war right now, fighting another way, and they've given them permission to go down and shoot us. the ways in which that last line comes from nowhere and hangs on the end. It's really, I remember going back to this because, it became sort of a cultural cliche to talk about Kanye West and the Hurricane Katrina moment. I remember going back to this and being actually really shocked. And I'm reading it because when you're hearing it, maybe I should have played it. It kind of just slides in because he's doing it in this kind of quick monologue. But when you slow down and really hear it, right, he goes, what can we do to help? The way you treat people. Like pause, black people, and it's like I'm not reading it weird, it's just no connectors. The black people, the less well off, as slow as possible. But again, you know what he means. And this is what he knows. And this is where we have to be very careful because in the sort of, I think, post-cultural renditions of this, I think the response was positive in a moment, but then later becomes a sort of joke of him just rambling. It's not rambling at all. It's just it's like bullet points, right? But you have to have the sort of connective tissue or understand how to produce the connective tissue between the points. Right? That's what I'm getting at. We already realize, I'm just repeating, we already realize a lot of people that could help are at war right now. So he's also hearing the critique as he's saying it. Red Cross is so slow, blah, blah, blah. So he's responding, and this is where I'm saying it becomes really interesting. He's trying to occupy all positions at once. This is the complexity of his own privilege as a black celebrity. Right, trying to be, and is, I would argue, in all the places. I shouldn't say trying to be. He's struggling with the fact that he is occupying all the positions at once. He's also a black man. He's also a celebrity. He's also in privilege. He's also suffering. He also understands. He also should be helping. He also, right? We already realize a lot of people that could help right now, who could help are at war right now, fighting another way. Pause. And they've given them permission to go down and shoot us. And to me, I'm like, for me, George Bush doesn't care about black people. Pause. This is like commentary, right? There's a way in which George Bush doesn't care about black people, which is the next line. Ooh, we're all like, ooh, whatever. He's talking to the president. To me, that's the line I can't believe got said and that no one talked about. And they've given them permission to go down and shoot us. It's important to note that this form of association, then Mike Myers says something. He's like, we're very sad. This is so hard. Etc. And that's when Kanye West says George Bush doesn't care about black people, and it ends, right? And he cut the Chris Tucker segment. Chris Tucker's like. It's important to note that this form of associative signifying on social political ills is common to African American expressive traditions, particularly in popular protest music that structurally resonates with the field holler, a form of call and response used first on plantations and work farms that coded shared experiences of suffering into music and into short terms that seem like non sequiturs to non-insiders. What is so often characterized as West's disconnected, off-the-cuff rant is formally no different than Stevie Wonder's Pastime Paradise or Marvin Gaye's Make Me Wanna Holler, right? They use that same staccato sort of delivery of bullet point, right? Or the staccato trace of recondite 5%er one-liners dropped across early 21st century rap and R&B music, right? There was that moment, particularly I was thinking like sort of in Nas and like AZ, where you'll be listening to a song. This is sort of in the 90s, early 2000s, this sort of big sort of post-Wu-Tang 5%er moment. And you would hear, they would say like, thing, period, and raping our women. And you're like, that wasn't relevant to that point about this, but yet it was, because there's a way of talking about a structure of oppression and sexual violence. Right? But again, from the outside, it just seems like random. Like, why is this mill thing about like losing a game of cards? You say this, right? It's because it signifies, it compresses a structure of meaning within. And indeed, in the second half of the statement, the structure of West's observations read like a bulleted distillation of how moments like Hurricane Katrina's aftermath are talked about in black communities, a kind of intra-community encoding that culminates as such in the explosive intimacy of West's closing observation. Again, they've given them permission to go down and shoot us. They, them, us. By finally settling on a mode of address, having processed where he falls in the continuum between them and us, West is then able to compress his sprawling and historicized personal sense of the moment into a clear and transmittable form. His posture changes, he straightens up and focuses on the camera. George Bush doesn't care about black people. In a singular utterance, West steps away from the referencing and indexing and signifying and processing and compresses the sprawl of the struggle into a single sentence, a signal. Indeed, even though the hashtag would not be introduced into social media until its 2007 implementation in Twitter, in its compression and its suddenness and its capacity to become appropriate to a range of negative experiences, George Bush doesn't care about black people can be read as one of the early instances of a social media hashtag. With his utterance, West gave life to a communicative structure that could be used to signal a broad range of daily experiences that in their core both resonated with and could be used to remind others of the political stakes of West's declaration. I remember with my friends, it was like, did your car break down? It's like, why'd your car break down? Because George Bush does not care about black people. Right? You just got your hair straightened and it's raining. Why? Because George Bush does not care about black people. No one thinks that the president controls the weather or that one's car broke down because of some targeted government action. But in encountering the sense of having been made negatively subject to forces beyond one's own immediate control, George Bush doesn't care about black people is revealed as appropriate to black suffering as any other utterance. It's completely transmittable, transportable, and useful. When West suddenly and unexpectedly blurred out, George Bush doesn't care about black people, I was not shocked at the declaration. I was shocked that it had been said in the middle of an obdurably white mainstream television event. I remember jumping up with something between a yelp, a yes, and a cry. I was able to see it live. Not what was said, but that it had been said. Because I could barely understand what he said, but I knew he had said something. Oh, he said it. People are like, what did he say? I'm like, but he said it. Because we have transcripts now. But in the moment, I would be a liar if I said I knew exactly what he had said. But I know he had said it. Not what had been said, but that it had been said. With the ensuing samples, memes, and the constant remixes, constituting what Dexter Thomas describes as, quote, a way to celebrate the fact that someone had finally managed to broadcast a collective sentiment felt by millions. Black Lives Matter. It's become de rigueur in some circles to mock West's outbursts, but in the moment it was right, and it was right on time. Like a rememory, the signal is always there, waiting for you. Simultaneously an experience of encounter and also an emergence and repetition out of the self. As a medium for the failure of any national entity to adequately or compassionately address the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina's aftermath, George Bush doesn't care about black people, crystallized the understanding that all political establishments had again failed. Tears in my eyes, I stood there. Much as the form of West ad-lib matches the plain structure of rap and soul's music encounter with negative social realities, the repetition of materials broadcast across sonic spaces, like those created by Black radio, and then later across digital spaces using email, itself becomes a form of content. The West statement becomes a sample. First a signal, then a sample, called upon to hold, then bloom, then regather meaning when words otherwise fail. In this paradigm, the act of sharing says everything that becomes too painful to repeat, even in the wake of the repetition of the conditions of why things happen. And let me close with this. And from Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, Keeanga-Yamahtta Smith narrates the arrival of the Black Lives Matter hashtag. After learning that George Zimmerman would not be charged in the murder of Trayvon Martin, she says, quote, out of despair over the verdict, organizer Alicia Garza posted a simple hashtag on Facebook, Black Lives Matter. It was a powerful rejoinder that spoke directly to the dehumanization and criminalization that made Martin seem suspicious in the first place and allowed the police to make no effort to find out to whom this boy belonged. It was a response to the oppression, inequality, and discrimination that devalued black life every day. It was everything, in 3 simple words. Black Lives Matter, the hashtag, is a recognition, a call to action, an ironic testimony. In this political context, social media performances motivate solidarity, not with a thing, but with an understanding. And again, you go back to the place of the body and thinking about this from an archival perspective, what does it mean to also try to elicit from archives the feeling of the understanding in the moment of the social media utterance? To use the language of the Ferguson Action website, we are connected online and in the streets. We are decentralized but coordinated. What does it mean to say that you are connected online and in the streets, that you're decentralized but coordinated? This is the power of the digital. Indeed, Kelly Moore has rightfully pointed out the motivational and also discursive power of the Black Lives Matter hashtag. She ties it to the idea of ashe, the power of making in the world, the crossroads, the place where meaning is made at the intersection between difference and familiarity, where we carry diasporically from the Yoruba to the Puerto Rican, to the Cuban, to the Brazilian, to the United States, and to the Americas in general. Ashe, the crossroads, she says, and I quote, the concept takes the special language of prayer and invocation, and in the double movement enshrines it as an interface. Ashe is fundamental to Yoruba poetics and is performed in song, sculpture, textiles, patterns, and medicine. Phonemic awareness of the slant rhyme between hashtag and Ashe, the sh. Black matter and black mater should draw our attention to the slippages and breaks between concepts. Slant rhyme, known as half, near, oblique, weak, lazy rhyme, is marked by its definitional deficiency in relation to perfect rhyme or true rhyme. One way to appreciate slant rhyme is as rhyme in black, as rhyme in the break. Attending to the pleasure of phonemic awareness is a commitment to the necessary compositional crime of black rhyme. In the case of Black Lives Matter, Ashe compositional protocols break, transfigure, and slant between street and digital interfaces. The Black Lives Matter hashtag is a bioelectric song whose Ashe was powerful enough to socially organize and threaten enemies online while also gathering people in physical geographies. In thinking about Moore's point, this notion of the slant rhyme from hashtag to Ashe, she offers us an interesting way of thinking about the circulation of energies through our own bodies at the moment of participation in a social media moment. In thinking about what's at stake in producing archives out of that moment, it is interesting, therefore, to imagine different ways to be able to visualize the feeling of participation, the kinds of narratives we need to create in relationship to archives that also transmit, be it creatively, electronically, sonically, or so on, that can transmit the feeling of the moment of participation, because that too we must find a way of accounting for in the metadata of what we think of as the social media archive. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Wow. We have some time for Q&A. If there are any questions for Dr. Parham? Can you hear me? Oh. Okay. Any questions?
First of all, once again, thank you for a very dense and important talk. The struggle in Ferguson, in one sense, was a struggle for power. And to archive that, one would have to archive not only the black participation and the movement participation, but the police. Absolutely. And the contradiction there. And so the map that you showed, to what extent does that either reveal or mask the fact that there were opposite tweets?
Absolutely.
And what does that mean for our understanding of how to archive the reality of American life?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for asking that. And in the longer version, I talk a little bit about this, and I'm glad you're bringing it up. In that map that I was showing, let's repeat a little bit. So in the map that I was showing, the moment of appearing on the map simply means you're tweeting about the event. It's not registering what you're tweeting about. And there's an interesting sort of sleight of hand that happens in that, where it takes assumptions, where on some level, not the map maker, which is separate, but the way the news article about the map is using it, on some level, part of the sort of what it's showing is, whoa, look at how all the people in the world are tweeting about this small event. And so there's already an assumption there of smallness of the occurrence of death that makes the use of the map be about simply the fact of participation itself, so that the meaningfulness of this death is on some level registered as a quantitative reality of how many people care about it, whether they care positively or negatively, right? In a way, there's something I think actually important and interesting and maybe even not neutral, but useful and productive there to think about, in that what does it mean to take all these localized sort of moments and think about them in a social media context where, of course, they've become globalized or nationalized, of course. And you have the complexity of even thinking about action in Ferguson and the real question of like people who live in St. Louis who are participating versus people who are coming from all over the country. You know, there's a real complexity we know there. But what gets lost in that, and I feel like this is what your question is getting at, are the ways in which just because people are participating and care it would be very dangerous for Black people to imagine that the care is for their benefit. And so this moment that gets talked about in the map and that story, sense of like, isn't it so great how social media is allowing all these people to connect with this important event? What gets lost are the ways in which even the immensity of participation doesn't have to mean anything good for Black people. And how you get that story to emerge out of it goes back to this real issue of what it means for the people in this room and just for people sort of on the street who do care about these issues to also be able to, on one hand, parlay that feeling of participation and that importance, rather, while at the same time keeping our own agenda at the forefront. Is that?
Are there any other questions? Well, could we thank Professor Parham for another, I mean, it's a brilliant presentation. Another round of applause, please. Thank you. We're going to take a brief break, and I do mean brief, just a couple minutes, to set up for our next panel, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're here for our first panel of the conference, and panel one is the Ferguson Effect on Local Activism and Community Memory, featuring Alexis Templeton, Kayla Reed, Brittany Farrell, and Aaliyah Brown will be moderating. Thank you for your time and your patience.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So I just first want to start by thanking the symposium organizers. You all have organized an incredibly rich project with the right people in the room. I think that that has been said already, that there are organizers, there's activists, there's archivists, there's data scientists, and so forth. So all of the right people are in the room. But more importantly, the right priority has been established. We have the opportunity to learn from Black women who are leaders in Ferguson resistance and the larger movement for Black lives. And beyond this movement, they are teaching us the most important lessons about democracy and Black resistance to white supremacy. So today, I'm incredibly pleased to be in conversation with Alexis, Brittany, and Kayla. This is my first time meeting them in person, but like many of you, I started following them in 2014. Their organizing, strategizing, and commentary showed me how to thread seemingly disparate pieces of my life together, being a public historian, being an academic, and most importantly, working in this particular iteration of the Black freedom struggle. So I will introduce them to you all. We have Alexis Templeton, who is the co-founder of Millennial Activists United and a student at Washington University in St. Louis. We have Kayla Reed, who is a community organizer with Ferguson Action Council and leadership team member for the Movement for Black Lives. And we have Brittany Farrell, who is an activist and co-founder of what was known as MAU, now practicing labor and delivery registered nursing, and will soon return to graduate school to pursue a master's in public health with a focus on maternal fetal health. So please welcome them, and we'll start our conversation. Great. So I first wanted you all to share with everyone, what was your origin story? Like, what got you into community organizing?
So, when I first got involved in organizing, I was an undergrad in college, and I was a non-traditional student. So I had my daughter at the age of 19, and I didn't return to college until I was 21. And when I got to college, and I was accepted into the nursing school, I began to really study health disparities within St. Louis. And the more I studied and the more I talked to people about how disproportionate these disparities were and how much they largely impacted Black people and people of color, I felt called to do something. So I became a part of an organization called the Black Student Nurses Association, and where I ran for a leadership position. And I leveraged my position, my power in that position as a student, to organize around health disparities within the community in which the university rested in Normandy. I organized a lot of programming around health and wellness, particularly mental health, sexual health, and nutrition and diet and exercise. And my target at that time was students of color and faculty and professors of color. And that's where the seed was planted for me as far as organizing is concerned. And it kind of just grew from there. And I feel like there was already something in me to kind of call me to that work, and that was just always being curious and having questions about the conditions of Black and brown people in this country. And I nurtured that part of myself, and my mentors and the people that loved me and people around me nurtured that part of me too. And from there, I began to want to stand in the gaps of disparity and inequity and inequality for Black and brown people. So that was my introduction to organizing. When Mike Brown was murdered in Ferguson, I was still a student at UMSL, University of Missouri, St. Louis, and it was one of those moments where, again, I couldn't just sit and watch what was happening. I felt called to do something. So I literally stopped everything I was doing, took a semester off from school, and like many of the folks out there, I committed my time, my energy to organizing on the ground in Ferguson.
I'm sorry. So I was 19 when Ferguson happened, so I was fairly young. I had really just gotten out of high school. Was involved in a severe accident where I lost my dad, my partner, and my uncle. I was the only one that survived, and so I was in limbo with all of that when Ferguson happened. And I had always been curious. I had always asked questions. I'd always had a certain type of fire around Black people and revolution. And I was a really big fan of the Black Panthers. My cousin made sure I was well read on Asada when I was 10. I was a huge fan of Tupac. I was that was me. And so I had always been. I was a really big fan of Malcolm X. I had just always felt called to Black people and Black struggle. And going to a predominantly white high school, having those roots enabled me to show up different at my school and in my classroom. So my first act of resistance, per se, was when Trayvon Martin was killed. And I walked around school in a sign that said, "I am Trayvon Martin," and I got shunned by a lot of my white peers, and my teachers felt it was weird. I heard a lot of comments from administrators, but I kept doing it. And I said I wouldn't stop doing it until they got justice. And so that was my first act of resistance, which is cool. I was a baby activist then. And then Ferguson happened, and I went outside and I just never came back in. I lived in Ferguson at the time, down the street. I grew up here. And I just went outside. I never came back in. And I just started organizing. I linked with Brittany. I found people that, I just found those people, and I stuck with them. And it grew from there. Before I knew it, I had co-founded an organization. You couldn't hear a chant without me leading it. And yeah, it just grew. So it was pretty unexpected for me. It was not something that I knew would happen, but I was grounded in the roots, so yeah.
Hey everyone. Thanks for inviting us. So I think when you grow up in a city like St. Louis, you kind of meet struggle before you are told it's struggle. And I was raised in North City, St. Louis. And I remember as a kid really kind of experiencing like the police as like a terror squad, right? Like when they came on the blocks, all the stuff was about to happen. People got shot, people went to jail. I remember being very young, watching my mother get arrested for possession, doing a couple months in the workhouse, and hearing stories, right? Like my brother's fathers went to prison and things like that. And when I was about 10, my dad had custody of me, so I moved from North City, St. Louis to North County, Moline Acres, which is 2 municipalities over. It's Ferguson, Delwood, and Moline Acres. And really seeing like a difference, right? That like my dad lived in a completely different situation. It was like 10 of us in a shotgun apartment, my grandma's apartment in the city in a 4-family flat. He had his own house, 3 bedrooms, a backyard. There were parks with swings that worked and slides. And I felt like the school was better. But there was still this presence of police. And what I felt like remembering very early was that they were a different kind of terror, that they weren't as like gung-ho as the city of St. Louis was, but that they still were an occupying force. And what they did was that they just took resources from you. They let you stay out of jail, but they came basically like the first of the month when they knew you got paid with a new ticket, an expectation that you would pay. And I remember when I was 11, my nephew, who's now a senior in high school, he was 1 at the time, his dad got pulled over for driving from my parents' house to his house, which is less than a half a mile away. He had a warrant. They were about to take him into custody, and protocol would say that my nephew would then be sent to the Division of Family Services to be picked up. And he pleaded, you know, he cried to this officer. He was like, my parent, you know, my mother-in-law and father-in-law just live right around the corner. Just please take my baby there. Please take my baby there. And I remember my sister calling, and I was, you know, preteen, so I'm on the phone as always. And I click over and I'm like, what's up, Alicia? And she's like screaming for someone to go get CJ. And I remember watching, you know, my dad try to hustle to get over there. And before he gets out the house, a cop car pulls into the driveway, and my brother-in-law is in the back seat, and my nephew's in the back seat. And they take my 1-year-old nephew out the back of the car and bring him to the door. And just remembering my dad being like, thank God that cop wasn't a complete asshole, you know? But feeling like, wow, this is what Black people just deal with, you know? Sending my brother out for ice on Thanksgiving and him being arrested just from the front door to the gas station and having to chase after municipality from municipality. And really feeling like that angered me, but that there was nothing I could do about it, right? And I felt like that was a lot of what Black people in the city and the county in St. Louis dealt with a lot, not understanding that there were pathways to reform policing, transform the institution. And so when Mike Brown was killed, I remembered a lot of those feelings, right? But, you know, not in a way that made me feel like I was destined to lead anything, just as enough reason to show up. Because my nephew, when Mike Brown was killed, was a freshman in high school. He was 6'2" at 14, and he often walked home from school. And just imagining what it would be like to get that phone call, and dealing with, you know, having 6 brothers, coming from, you know, kind of this struggle of like, you know, the city police kill people, not the county. Why did Mike Brown get killed? Like, what is this about? He should have got a ticket at the least, you know, maybe taken to jail at the worst, but absolutely not been shot in the middle of the street in broad daylight. And then to feel like coming out in response to that got you back such a harsh reaction from police. And I never trusted police. I was never one of those people who were like, the police are meant to protect and serve me. I never felt like that, but I still felt like, for lack of better terms, damn, you know, like this is wild. And that anger and frustration and shock turned into me feeling like, what is a pathway to move people towards safety as we continue to fight for our rights? And how do we turn our personal stories into something that really inspires more folks to get involved? And in that kind of lane, I began to, you know, pick up the bullhorn more and got into formal organizing, working on policy and electoral politics, getting deeply involved in the movement for Black Lives, the coalition, and eventually kind of emerging as one of the leaders. But still remembering, you know, that even after 3 years, after 3 years, this year my nephew is 17 and he just got his driver's license and he just got his first car, and feeling like I had to have this talk with him. Like his dad was going to talk to him, but I needed to talk to him. And watching him, you know, be like, Auntie Kayla, I know what you're about to say, right? Like I've watched you for 3 years. I know what you know, what I'm expected to do. I know to turn my radio down. I know to always wear my seatbelt. I know to have my, you know, insurance card not buried deep in the glove compartment. And just watching that cycle continue keeps me very focused. But I think my origin story is just one of experience. And I wasn't moved to action until something really let me know that what I had been experiencing could get a lot worse if I didn't do something.
Thank you for sharing that. So I've talked about Ferguson as a history. So there's a history in the United States and beyond the United States of state-sanctioned violence, vigilante violence, and so forth. But I wanted to know if you all thought of yourselves as like in that legacy of Black resistance. So do you think of yourselves and compare yourselves with other periods in time of resistance, or even in different places? Do you compare yourselves to different resistance in different places?
I don't think I compare. So I think people compared us before we decided to compare ourselves. And I think folks said that this is a movement about liberation, when really at first it was a movement about Mike Brown and this idea that the officer who killed him should be in jail. And, you know, the transformation from just justice for one person to abolishing an entire criminal justice system was a path and a journey that we all had to go on, of being politicized, and understanding, you know, Black history in a way that wasn't so polished down to Booker T and Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a patriot, like nonsense like that, right? And understanding that, like, actually we get taught a very romanticized version of Black history so that we don't hear the part about resistance, and so that we don't hear the part about dissent, so that we don't continue in its legacy. And I think kind of once you figure out how to decipher through that and find information for yourself, then you do realize that there has been a constant struggle toward freedom that Black people in America have been a part of, and then throughout the diaspora. And so, yes, I think that Ferguson is one of those one of those points in the long continuum. And I think we have a long way to go before the final chapter of our story is being written. But, and I think that is, you know, is human-like to compare two things, but I don't think that we should be compared to the Black Power movement. I don't think that we should be compared to the Civil Rights movement. I don't think that we should be compared to the movement for emancipation. I think that at each of those times, America was in a very unique place, and we were responding to that. And the place that America is in now, the movement for Black Lives, activists who are engaged around police brutality, are trying to figure out what is the best form of resistance. Is it a hybrid of these, you know, very different kind of non-violent and what is considered, you know, violent organizations? Is it something completely different? And I think that what we're also actively doing is making sure that we hold the critiques of previous iterations of movement center, in that there could be 3 straight Black men up here telling this story in front of you, and that there is intentionality to not do that in a way that there hasn't been before, that there is more inclusion in some ways in this current movement, but that we still have a long way to go. And that this isn't something that's one track, right? That there is no voting rights act, or there is no act to stop killing Black people that Congress could pass that would essentially stop a movement from going forward, because we now have a strong enough analysis to see where some of those movements fell short, and the ways in which white supremacy reacts to Black dissent. We have research and stats on that in order to make sure that how we move forward is always contextualizing, always adjusting to respond to that. So I think it's different, but I do think that, you know, I'm honored to be a part of that conversation, but mostly if we do something to make material conditions better for Black people.
Yeah, and like Kayla, I'm also very honored to be a part of that conversation. I think, kind of like what you said, using prior movements as somewhat of like a blueprint, or what we have done wrong, what we should do differently, even when we're looking at you know, the types of interpersonal things that, and you know, that I guess come up in movement work, and how we have conversations about how like sexism causes breakdown within movements, or homophobia, and really learning from, you know, what happened with the first civil rights movement with like SNCC and the Black Panther Party and the women's positions in those organizations, and how we're choosing to be better, and how even a sense of empowerment by knowing that Black women leadership can really push back on and speak to the work that has always been done by Black women, and that gives us a lot to stand on, because at one point in history and in Black struggle, that's something that we were not taught. It was something that was never brought up. And queerness in Black struggle was something that was not taught, and it was never brought up. And to be able to use prior movements without comparing ourselves to them, but using them as, you know, something to look at and say, okay, so now since we're in this struggle for Black liberation, what does liberation actually look like for Black people, like all Black people? And how do we exemplify that and move in that, you know? So I think that there's really no need to compare ourselves. You know, we've we're working in a movement that has been created because conditions are still very much violent and disproportionate and disenfranchising for Black people in America. And with that comes its own set of experiences and changes and things that Black folks are actively working towards to make our experience in this country better within and outside of our communities. But I really appreciate being able to look at those movements and say, okay, so we know we need to not have this happen again, you know, and this is what we can do. Or, you know, to completely deconstruct the idea that leadership looks one particular way, or it marries into a particular union or fits into a particular box.
I don't see my participation in the movement or the movement in Ferguson as to be compared to any other movement. I see it as I see it on a continuum and a spectrum as well, a point. Because I look at how movements are started and how they come about, and I specifically think about the Black Panther movement and how it turned into the Black Power movement because someone was killed by police, because they were experiencing police terror, just as folks are experiencing in Moline Acres, just as folks are experiencing in St. Louis City, just as folks are experiencing right across the way in Ferguson. You know what I'm saying? And what I see in each movement is the attempt to do something different, and we definitely don't always get it right. We definitely didn't get it right with this movement, but I feel that people that are leaders become catalysts for what we don't get right. For example, I think that here. Let me take a second to get my thoughts together. I'm sorry. I'm thinking a lot, and I'm trying to put it all out. I apologize. Cool. Okay. So I think that we learn from the things that happen in movements before us, but also that when we come to the table and we're called to do something, that action looks different. We implement the same ideals from before that are harmful to people that are in the movement now. We're not. It was hard to. I can't get my thoughts right. I'm sorry.
No, take your time.
I'm
It's
sorry.
okay. It's okay. And we can come back to it if you want. If you want me to.
Yeah, we can come back to it.
Okay. And also, just thinking about history, I want to know you all's thoughts on how you've changed politically, socially, in your personal lives. How have you changed as you've been doing this work?
That's a heavy question.
And I want to ask that particularly in this room, as we're, a lot of us, focused on how to document this work, and that we're documenting people's lives and they're not fixed in a certain point in time, or they're not fixed in a certain social, political space. So I wanted you all, if you can, and if you feel comfortable, to talk about the ways that you've changed.
Yeah. We talked about this in the hallway, but basically, what I fear in the retelling of stories is that it does a disservice to the personal transformation and journey that a person goes on while being a part of a movement, right? That like there is a movement inside of a person, and such that like in 2014, I don't think I had any critiques of Barack Obama. I don't think I had one. I was like, it's so busy. Like, what do you mean? And I think in 2014, I had no knowledge of the systematic disenfranchisement of Black people, right? And I had no understanding of the ways in which race, class, and gender intersected to create a unique experience for Black women, for Black people, for queer folks. In 2014, I had no knowledge of anything about my trans family, right? I had no understanding. I believed that gender was a binary that was directly tied to sex, and I think, you know, WashU's education has had some help along the way to give language to what I was starting to see, but I think that who I was on August 9, 2014 was a 24-year-old Black woman who was pissed off about policing and thought that if we just focus on policing, things will get better. So in that journey, I've become a lot less optimistic, but that, you know, it's just like this one domino that we just got to hit in the right way and it'll all fall down. But, you know, I've become a lot more politicized in this relationship to my personal decisions, my personal relationships, my existence as a politic in the larger, in my community, in my family, in the world. And even when I'm not in a street shutting something down, that my politic has to matter. I was just telling Brittany and Alexis that my best friend from college shared a post on Facebook. My partner is, their name is J. Marie. They're gender nonconforming, identifies gender queer. And my best friend from college shared a post that said, the state of Washington or California, one of the last blue states, is introducing a piece of legislation about a third gender category. And she shared it and she said, this is what's wrong with the world. We're becoming too progressive for ourselves, and I just don't want to bring a baby into that. And I, like, you know, you scroll past something and you're like, what? Like you go back. And so, you know, I'm engaging because I love you. And I'm like, I want to push you on how this behavior is actually mad toxic to the 3,000 folks who see this every day. And it reinforces really problematic beliefs. I had a different friend last week who shared something and said, I don't understand why Black men hate Black women so much. Hating Black women is literally the gayest thing you could do. And I was like, what? You know, so I engage, right? Like, I'm gonna just take one for the team. I'm gonna dive in this conversation. And I did so, and what I got back was this like very harsh, like, I don't got time for that like gay agenda stuff. We're just gonna have to agree to disagree, you know, and like very dismissive comments like that. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like, I always imagined you as like my like maid of honor in my wedding, but like, could you be that if you are actively dehumanizing the person I might marry? Like, does that work? How do we hold that? And I was like, yeah, we can hold that, can we? And like, part of my commitment to what I know to be true and to live a life that honors the folks who live in the margins is to not be in relationship with someone who would actively erase that, which is a hard decision, you know? But it's an important decision. And so I think that 3 years ago, I would have saw that and felt a way about it, not really have the language to do it, and just kind of kept scrolling because, like, who wants to engage in that? And this time, it's like, actually, my silence is consent of that behavior, and I absolutely refuse to at least not go down swinging. And I think that a history that tells a movement has to be able to tell that growth, because we freeze King, you know? We snapshot him. He's one way. That's not actually true. King in 63 was not King in 68, right? We freeze Malcolm. That's not who he was, right? We freeze Fred Hampton. That's not who he was. You know, and I'm using men because, like, this is who we listen to, but we freeze, you know, like Coretta. We freeze Rosa. We freeze Fannie Lou Hamer. We freeze them in that one image that tells the story the way we want it to be told. And that actually does a disservice to the possibility that a person can grow, can be better, can learn, can have more critiques, and is actually human, right? Because the issue with King is that he was looked at as so unhuman that he almost is like a superhero. And you're not super, like, human, right? You're actually super sensitive, super exposed, super vulnerable, and having to go through this journey in front of people. And telling that part of that, allowing vulnerability to be a part of truth, is actually what keeps movements alive and keeps it where the doors are open, because there's not this expectation that you have to be king to come inside.
Yeah. All of what you just said, and the idea, yeah. I would like for this to be like a conversation, because this has many layers to it. I think a part of romanticizing leaders and movements, meaning, you know, it means that we do freeze them. It allows us to be comfortable in who they were in that moment, that we take that snapshot. You know, I think that is very harmful. And I don't want to be like frozen as who I was in 2014 or who I am now. And I think, even to be honest, a lot of people do that even now. Like, they remember who you were from the timeline when you were on the Andy Worm lot, or they remember who you were from the highway, or they remember you from the film Who Streets. Like, these are certain images and moments in time that people hold on to because you know, for different reasons, whatever reasons. And it doesn't allow us room to really evolve and become, you know, who we truly are, and to give us room to change or make mistakes, or, you know, to even bounce back and learn from those mistakes. I know in 2014, I feel like I've always been a political person. There was a moment in my life where I was very much subdued, and I didn't have the language or even the courage to address a lot of the things that I've experienced or that I was aware of. I have a sister that's trans who has completely cut herself off from the family because of the way that our family treated her when she was with us. And while this was happening, I didn't have the language for it. You know, I did not know how at risk Black trans women are in this country. I grew up in a very violent home. We were in and out of shelters a lot. I watched my mom hold my brother's father at gunpoint. You know, I watched that violence that Black women are subjected to by intimate partner relationships, and I watched how Black women trying to protect their children oftentimes meant that they were criminalized in the act. And I also have watched how sexual abuse in families are oftentimes not spoken about because, you know, that puts black men or the offender, whomever it is, at risk of being a victim to the system, you know. And so I've always been political in having these experiences and the thoughts around those experiences and what that means for me as a Black woman growing up without a safe space, and growing up in a body that was oftentimes treated like it belonged to everyone but me. And then I was a middle child, and I have a younger brother who is now 21, and it's about 6'4", 6'5", and I have a daughter who's 9 years old who is to my shoulder, and people think that she's 12, and, you know, constantly having to fight for the safety and security of a younger sibling and the safety and security of a young Black girl who was most likely to be suspended or expelled from school just by being opinionated or being smart or feeling like what she has to say is important, or having people think that she's more mature for her age or more mature than what she actually is because she looks 12 and she's actually 9. Or even when it comes to identity, like sexual identity, I identify as a queer Black woman. So having largely Black cisgender men believe that because of the way that I look, that I belong to them, and I have no right to define myself for myself. So just years and years and years of what it means to be like a walking politic. And from 2015 up until now, I have found that language to be able to speak to my experiences, and I've found that courage to be able to speak to what has happened that I didn't have in that moment. And to screen snap me right now where I'm at would do a disservice to all the little Black leaders, you know, in the making who won't get to know that backstory, or won't get to know what is to come, because we like to be comfortable with who we see right in front of our faces. And I think in this movement, there's lots of experiences that, you know, I typically like to call family business because it's kind of messy when you're talking about it in mixed company. But I do think that when you're talking about it amongst Black folks, it's a lot of stuff that we need to break down with one another, and how we treat Black women, Black trans folks, Black queer people, and how it's oftentimes believed that we're doing it for the greater good of Black folks, but it's actually erasure and it's violent. And I think that from those experiences in a leadership position in this movement even has evolved so many of us. And I think that we have to be able to see leaders who have the, I don't want to call it a privilege because it's not always a privilege, but who have the visibility, right? So for leaders who have the visibility to tell these stories, it's important that we continue to treat people as they are evolving human beings. And also understanding that, you know, as we continue to move through this struggle, the same person that you meet today might not be the same person 5 years from now. And really sitting in what that actually means for yourself as a consumer of this Black pain, of this struggle, that if you're like at distance and you're watching from social media or you're watching from your television, you are visually and sometimes emotionally consuming what this movement is, and understanding that you're actually viewing full, whole individuals who live on this spectrum, or who are capable of feeling and who are capable of evolving, and not wanting to take that away from them.
I think that again, when I came into the movement, I was 19, and so I was growing. My brain was still developing. And I really came into myself and who I am, not just as a political person, but as an individual. I came into the movement with a big ball of hair. I was definitely more feminine. I identified as straight. And now I'm here. I'm a masculine-centered Black woman, person some days, boy other days, whoever, you know. And I think that coming into those intersections and occupying those intersections has taught me who I need to be fighting for, and who it's important that, who my visibility is important to, and who that puts on for, and who that encourages and puts fire into to come outside, or feel safe enough to come outside because someone like them or someone that's fighting for them because they look like them is out there. And I think that's important because we did not have that safety in the beginning. There were people who did not feel comfortable coming outside because they were queer or because they were trans. They felt like they had to stay in the house. Now you have people who are like, yo, we gonna bring you to the front line because you're what this movement looks like. And I think it's important to have people who are leading, who are willing to step over the boundaries of gender, who are willing to step over the boundaries of sex and sexuality, and womanhood even. And show and display and illustrate how it looks different and how it doesn't look one way, and how within these and how we try to break away from binaries but still exist in them, in order to showcase things and make them look a certain way. And I feel like that leaves folks out, and I'm not about that. I've learned through my experience. And I've learned through my experience and because of how I've been treated, what fighting for all Black people looks like. And I think it's a painful experience. It's traumatizing, it sucks. It comes with a lot of bitterness, it comes with a lot of anger. But when you meet those folks who didn't give you those experiences, who may experience that one day, it's a different type of passion, it's a different type of fire, and there's a different type of nurturing that comes to provide the space for folks who just are different. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll just say that, like, in 3 years, what I think is very difficult is the ways in which. So like, we can lift up right now after we all just spoke that there is a class analysis here, right? That, like, not every activist talks like us. Not every person can come in and talk about the neoliberal crisis facing our democracy, right? That is not the reality of the Black people who were in Ferguson, who were in Baltimore. And, you know, that movements tend to elevate those who can assimilate into the culture of knowledge and academia, which has put us in privileged positions, right? And I'm sort of speaking, but it has put us in privileged positions as people who are, as a student who's like at WashU, who was not at WashU 3 years ago. I recognize that I am a privileged person within the movement, even living at marginalized intersections. And so we have to be able to also honor those who don't talk like me, right? Who cannot break down the ways in which capitalism suffocates Blackness, right? But who understands that, like, a Black mama has 3 jobs and can't raise her children and lives in the poorest neighborhood whose kids go to the worst schools, and that actually just sucks. And that is enough because they're lifting up the same critique without the language. And the other thing I will say is that we have to be super, super, super careful to not put so much awe on a person that you stunt their ability to grow, right? That you put us on such a pedestal that we fear falling out of that box, right? Because to fall out of that box is to fall out of privilege. And to fall out of privilege means what, right? When people who ain't never had nothing all of a sudden get the world, right? That, like, we are in a movie that is being talked about as being an Oscar-nominated film. That is different than when the movie was being filmed and we was just living a regular life, you know, in front of a camera held by a person who was our friend, right? And I think that it's important to recognize the way that we put so much awe, that we create a situation where there is such an exceptional Negro that we don't have any expectations outside of just being that person. And I don't want to be that, right? I want to turn 30 and there are people from my community who expect me to be better than I was. And I want to be able to say, you know, I want to do something different. Maybe I don't want to march in the streets for police brutality tomorrow. Maybe I want to work on Tashara Jones's campaign for mayor, you know. Maybe Brittany wants to go deliver babies and get a master's in public health. And there has to be room and space given to that even while a movement is happening. Because I also don't want to bottleneck leadership, right? That like the next time you come, I actually don't want to be the one talking to you, because I should have done enough job as a leader to develop a new voice who can come and talk to you. And if we don't do that, if it's the same person at every conference, at every, you know, if it's the same couple people, you got to be like, hey, you know, just wondering, where is everyone else? Because a movement is not just a collection of individuals with a lot of Twitter followers. That can't be our definition, right? A movement is not just those with a lot of Twitter followers. That cannot be the definition, or the person who's able to get out a tweet quickly. That's not a movement. A movement, stealing from Brittany's, we sit on panels a lot together, the anatomy of a movement actually requires so many different parts that we tend to not honor. We honor the brain, we honor the heart, we don't honor the feet, we don't honor the hands, we don't honor the unseen labor that houses and feeds and transports and babysits and prints papers and designs flyers and opens the door of the building and puts out the chairs, right? Like, all of those things are a part of the movement, and those people's stories never got told before, and we should do a much better job of making sure to figure out how to tell those stories this time.
So many people have viewed Ferguson through a screen, whether that's a mobile device or their desktop or what have you. What have they missed, and are they missing by not actually being here?
I mean, I think you missed what we just talked about. I think you missed the humanness, and I think you missed the humanness and the growth. I think you missed the mistakes. I think you missed the failures. I think you missed the successes and how those are celebrated. I think you missed the hard conversations and the conversations that don't get had. I think you missed the fights or the pull up at the Ferguson Library then. You know, like, that's a reality, and it's real, and we hide it because we don't want it to look bad, but it is what it is. It's messy. Liberation is messy. If it's a mess to get there, we gonna be a mess getting there. And that's just what it is. It's about unlearning and undoing. And I think that that's missed online because we have to elevate ourselves to be these perfect people and these perfect leaders and these perfect voices for Black liberation. And it's just not that. We're just, honestly, for lack of a better term, we're some average niggas out here who just want some different shit. We want things to look different. We want to be accepted. We want to be able to exist, bruh, you know? And like, we want to be able to talk just like that and it be okay. And I think that's what social media misses. I think they miss they miss people. They miss the interaction, and I think that's super, super important. Because I'm not just a bunch of retweets and favorites. I'm a whole ass human, and Twitter misses that.
Yeah. I also think it misses community, right? It misses like Kayla's first semester in college coming over to Brittany and Alexa's house for dinner because I couldn't balance cooking for myself and reading all the assignments. It misses, you know, like, can you pick up Kenna today from school, you know? It misses, like, Alexis, I want to cut my hair off. Can you come to the barbershop with me? Because I'm super nervous. And, you know, it misses community, right? It misses love. It misses hope, despair. It misses...
not being able to pay your bills.
Right, struggle. And, you know, like, I can't tweet about the new J. Cole album because people, like, we expect you to always talk about policing. And it's like... damn, like I actually like want to be on Twitter just for the reason I signed up to be on Twitter, like I want to participate in this shady hashtag, and I want to be able to talk about scandal, like I like Kerry Washington, and it's like you can't do it. Everything has to be this like nuanced, like you got to come up with a, and I had to turn my notification. I don't care how many retweets it gets. I'm talking to myself sometimes, like I just want to be able to be, and like that part is, what I feel like we didn't get to talk to leaders previously about, like what does it mean, like family and Thanksgiving, like can I tell you how hard Thanksgiving is for Black people? Because you got to hold this like anti-colonial, imperialistic, genocidal history, but also I just want turkey and dressing with my mama, and like I can't have both. I got to pray that colonialism and capitalism fall, but also thankful for the sweet potatoes and macaroni, and like. Sometimes it's like, damn, like I want to go to McDonald's and get a high C orange before they discontinue it. And it's like, I can't believe you're supporting this company that pays minimum. And it's like suffocating, You miss the laughs and just like the random fish fries and the random nights at Mission Taco where we're like plotting a campaign on a napkin. And pissing all the white people off who came to have a good time, and we're like, white supremacy, just like at the table, completely, and you miss awkward moments where you pull up to Quick Trip and it's a cop who tear gassed you, and you're like, bro, this is awkward, like, and this is, you missed the court and the trials and the tears and the hardships and the fear that comes with what it means to be charged with a felony, and like. Like borrowing somebody's car to bring Brittany a letter that I wrote about her, her for the judge before the sentence. It's like real life. Yeah. And we like, who has time to be like, oh wait, gotta tweet it. Like that's not. At some point, I think we were kind of like, oh, we could tweet everything, but eventually, it's like self-care required us to actually move away from a platform that was like so just put this major spotlight on you, and like grow, like I don't want to engage, like I don't want to critique everything Donald Trump does, because damn it, who has the time, like who has the will and the way, and like actually, I don't want to show up to the net neutrality protest because I protested for a year every damn day, and like you go do it because I did it, and not to be arrogant, but like to be exhausted, and there has to be. Like what is different about this is like I kind of refuse now to run myself into the ground because I understand how long of a marathon this is, right? And I want to get married. I want to have children. I want to travel. I want to, like I want to live and also fight, right? But I want my life to be a fight. I want like my existence to be in resistance to the system, but also like my existence to have moments of joy and wholeness and love and community. And I don't want to stroke out. Like I refuse to let this shit kill me. But I refuse to stop fighting, and like holding those two things is very, very hard. And I don't know how you could tell that story, that's what you chose this career for. I didn't choose that career, but I hope that you could figure out a way to hold that, because that is the truth, that it's a beautiful struggle, right? It's a beautiful thing to fight for Black people. It is a struggle to fight for Black people. It is nothing but love that makes me fight for Black people, and I hate having to do it because how many people have died and we still fighting for police not to come out and be able to just shoot you with impunity? Like, how many people have died, right? Like, why are we still having to chant words that were written decades ago? Why hasn't it changed? And why is the burden to change it on those who live under the oppression? Like, and I think that's where I'm at. It's kind of like, no, I'm not go to that protest. I'm a chill. We go book a trip to go to Carnival next year, and I'm going to miss whatever event is in St. Louis, and you're going to feel away, and I don't care because I deserve to also not die one day feeling like I did everything I could for my people, but I didn't get to actually experience what I dream of for my people. Yeah, and that's hard. But we're figuring it out.
Yeah.
How do you have a movement that lasts a lifetime, that doesn't have a dash, that's written in some chapter of some book, that's a continuous thing? I want to figure that out. I don't want somebody to put a sunrise and a sunset on my story, because it's not done until it's done.
Social media puts some really wild expectations on folks. And kind of what Kayla already mentioned, what you all miss is the residual impact, effects of what this movement has meant for a lot of people. So a little bit of a personal story I'm going to share. So after my felony charge from the I-70 shutdown, I accepted a plea bargain, SIS, with 5 years probation, restitution, and no contact with the victim of the state. So with that, I have, anybody who runs a background check on me can see that I have a felony charge on my record. And what that meant for me was having to jump through hoops with the Board of Nursing to prove that I wasn't a criminal in the state of Missouri. And so now a little bit about me, I've kind of been invested in the health of Black and brown people for, since I was in undergrad. And since I've been out of undergrad, I'm still very much committed to that, and I have this long-term vision that I want to fulfill, to be able to be a provider for Black and brown folks and queer and trans folks. So what that means is that I need as many opportunities as I can get to broaden my skill set. So a couple months ago, I applied for this position for gynecologic oncology. And as I walked through this unit at this hospital, I began to see that while this is one of the biggest hospitals in the city of St. Louis, the patients on the floor did not reflect the community that succumbs the hardest to reproductive cancers, Black women, right? White women are diagnosed more, Black women die more. You look around this hospital floor, we are not there. So I struggled with myself for a minute. I said, okay, hey, but I do want to be here because there's a wealth of knowledge I can get from here that will inform my work in the future. What happens? I get offered that position and I accept it, and I'm going through the process that I need to go through to become an RN on this floor. I was going to become chemo certified, and I was going to do my thing in that area. So I was going to transition from maternal fetal health into that area, and I was quite excited about it. I get a phone call about 2 weeks later, 3 days before I was submitting my resignation notice to my current employer, and they rescinded my offer because of the felony charge that they saw on my record, right? This is not something that I would tweet, but this is the residual effects of what it means to be in the struggle for Black and brown people, right? You are criminalized to the point to where no matter what the intention or the goal is, no matter how good your intentions might be, no matter how far you could move the needle for Black and brown people in reproductive health, the state, when the state sees you as a target and they choose to politically persecute you, you are instantly criminalized to the point to where there is no advancement unless they say so. So those residual effects that out of many people who are feeling them, that is what you miss on social media. People are still here trying to live their regular everyday lives and who cannot because of their involvement in a movement that we were a catalyst for, that swept the nation, right? That swept the world, and you miss that, and that's that humanness that they were talking about, that we were talking about, So in missing that, I think that it kind of, in some ways, unless these stories are shared like they are now, it minimizes the holistic experience that freedom fighters actually face trying to do this work, trying to stay committed in a way that's meaningful, and trying to survive.
Well, they're telling me that we have to wrap up, but I just wanted to give you all a chance to give your last words. It can be about anything. It can be about Fenty Beauty. It can be about 444, whatever is on your mind right now. But I just wanted to make sure that you all had the last say in this conversation before we wrap it up.
I'm sorry there wasn't time for some discussion.
Do we have time for maybe a few questions?
You know, I like to be decent and in order.
Skip our last words. Can people ask questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
5 minutes
Okay.
and really have questions. Yeah, so 5 minutes.
Sounds good. Thanks.
You had a question?
Yeah, I do. I'm trying to feel you all, you know, but I have an issue. It goes back to your earlier points about the relationship between the current situation and the struggle in Ferguson and the history of the struggle. And I'm somebody from the 60s, active for the last 50, 60 years. So when I hear you talk, I'm hearing things that happened already. It's a repeat. It's not like you're different. And so, for example, take the question of policy, what to do about the police. Or take the question of being in a medical field, right? There was a medical committee for human rights. You know, there was the Black Panther free clinics. There were the Third World Women's Alliance that dealt with issues of health, et cetera. And so I would urge you to do what you said you were doing in terms of studying what actually happened so that you can be able to sustain the struggle for your next 50 years, because we need the next generation to come forward. But the other question I wanted, or the point I wanted to make, was this contradiction between reform and revolution. In other words, there are a lot of issues that we've been fighting on and will continue to fight on. But the issue is, how do we come to an understanding of the ultimate fight to transform the society into the kind of society we want to live in? And so if you take SNCC, for example, what SNCC did was went out and found Fannie Lou Hamer and brought the people forward. What the Panthers did was went out and tried to figure out what social force in our community could really go up against the power structures, right? And so I'm looking for your conversation to begin to deal with those kinds of issues. Where are the people of Ferguson, the working people, the poor people of Ferguson that have to come forward? Where are the understanding of the social forces that can actually go up against the kind of people that support Trump and the 30% or whatever the percent is that support him? In other words, I really hope that you deepen your understanding of the issues that we're facing so that we can have a strategic understanding of the unity necessary for a revolutionary transformation. And that's everybody. And anyway, because I'm feeling you as part of this youthful generation, but I'm frustrated in the way in which you have made a difference between yourself and those who came before you.
I don't think it's right to say they don't have a deep understanding.
Yeah, I don't.
Great. I didn't want to do it.
I've only heard them for like 20 minutes. That's a bold claim to make on their behalf.
And
Yeah.
also there in front of you, that question that you're asking, these are them.
Yeah.
They've just told us their story, and they're responding to now. And I think sometimes when we're looking back and we're using history, we fetishize it. And we think, hey, these pictures look great, and what they're saying is that though they're going to learn, I just feel you shouldn't have to answer.
Yeah.
With all you've shared, with all you've given.
Yeah.
And then to sort of,
You don't have to answer that.
Right.
basically, it's just the fact that sometimes we need to learn, and you're missing the point of evolving. You're missing the point of 21st century. Though the issues are the same, they just said about the chants. Decades ago, we're still saying the same chants. We haven't lost the connection to the past or the respect to the past. But it's really important sometimes to really understand what is the difference of now and how do we respond to now. And also, also the fact that they're fighting for their lives and the fact that they're actually saying that they want to live as well as protest, it's a really important fact that we haven't, I don't know. Sorry.
So I would suggest that we continue that conversation later. I don't want to detract from the incredible amount of information that they have just shared, like so generous. They shared a deep understanding of history and personal lived history, and I want to acknowledge that. But if we have time for one more question that is an actual question, not a comment, not commentary, but a question.
In the meantime, though, what I will say is I appreciate the response, but I don't know if you were listening the whole time, but what I will say is that we all said it is an honor to be added into the continuation of a long legacy of people who fought for the rights of marginalized communities and Black people. If I said it, I said I don't know if I deserve to be there, but I'm honored to be included among the ranks. And what I will say is that we have to also hold that there is a reason why we're still fighting for what was fought for 50, 60 years ago. And that we have to hold that with every kind of rise of Black liberation struggle, that there has been a dramatic pushback on our ability to see the fruits of our labor, right? To see the demands and the goals come into fruition. And I'm not just a protester, right? And I think that we have programs that honor the history of things like the Panthers. Books and Breakfast has been going on since August of 2014. They do two, or one in North City, St. Louis. They provide free breakfast and political education to not only children, but their parents. We have seen a move toward policy. That more than 30 states have passed policy, not Missouri. We tried, and we're working on it.
Like Community Birth and Wellness Center, who are taking space.
And I think that what we recognize is that what the snapshot did in previous movements is that it did not tell the story of the ecosystem that worked together toward the larger agenda. It told the story of a few single people in mass is what it told. And that we are doing the work to learn about the history. I am majoring in African and African American studies to literally learn this, but also that we are doing policy work. We believe in direct action. We believe that we can transform, that our communities can be transformed on a local level, and we understand the relationship to power building outside of the system and through electoral politics, that we understand the ways in which political education and programmatic work move us toward the agenda. And I think that really a critique should not be lifted up of us. It should be lifted up at those who came before us that look down on us with such a disappointment, as if though you didn't go through a journey. If I'm saying I'm going through a journey, do not expect that in 3 revolutions around the sun, I figured out the equation that's going to get us free, right? Even if I learned all of your history, it will not give us enough information to get us free, because if it would have, then wouldn't we already be there? And we have to literally continue to mold and adjust to the increase in the militarization, to the increase in the ways in which capitalism impacts us, to the increase that we're not dealing with sheriffs and water hoses. We're dealing with the ability to send a drone across the street and bomb a whole community, that my cell phone is a tracking device and also one of the only devices to tell truth from in spite of mainstream media, that we are also leveraging we need to make a crisis so that which we appeal to those who are not witnessing our pain in such a way that they care. We have quoted Asada, we have quoted Martin, we have read all of these things. I study Fannie Lou Hamer. My senior thesis will probably be on Fannie Lou Hamer.
Also giving critique to like the mistakes that the past has made
mistakes.
internally, like, and how that shapes how our movement looks today. How it's hard for queer leaders to be queer leaders at all in this movement because of how leadership looked before and how we position folks who aren't queer. How we threw Bayard Rustin to the side because he was queer and we uplifted Martin. You know what I'm saying? How we didn't really how we don't really talk about Fannie Lou Hamer enough simply because she's a black woman. How we don't talk about Audre Lorde because she's a black lesbian woman. And how she really gives a lot of intersection and critique and policy around stuff that we should be talking about today. We left a lot of things out from the past, and I think that these movements bring that forward, and we're also changing what y'all didn't get right. And I think that that's fair.
And I take my time because the other thing is that we sat down with women from SNCC 2 years ago. They paid for us to go on a vacation with them. And flew us to Florida and told us, live your life because the work will be there. And I lived my life. I didn't have children. My marriages failed. I don't have a retirement plan. I will plow the freedom plow until the last breath. Figure out how to sustain and push forward. And there has to be a nuance that says, I am willing to die for my people, but I should not have to. And that there are many tools to use to dismantle the master's house. And that we've tried some, and that we're going to try those again, and that we may not get us to freedom, but maybe closer to, just like the generations before us did, right? But we are also fighting against something that's requiring us to do it again. You fought for the Voting Rights Act. We're having to do it again. So this time we're not going to fight for an act that can be gutted. We need to fight for something bigger, right? We need to fight for a constitutional amendment. We need to figure out how to leverage the ways in which white supremacy responds to black dissent so quickly and so powerfully that we're not shot in our beds when we're 21 years old. And every December 4th, we're remembering, on one hand, we're celebrating the long legacy of Alpha Phi Alpha or Jay-Z's birthday, and then we're having to lift up Fred Hampton was assassinated in his bed in the middle of the night. Right? That like, why do I have to know all of these facts to just prove that I'm worthy to sit at the table?
And
right?
Also, speaking of history repeating itself, it's a lot to be said for how your critique of a table full of black women who have just opened ourselves up speaks to the struggle of black women doing this work. Like, as a man of the 60s, your critique speaks to the struggle of black women then, and it speaks to the struggle of black women now doing this work. We've just shared a lot, and we shouldn't have to come with CVs and our transcript to be understood that we're still learning.
We can. And the last piece I'll say is that if we can't be welcomed into a space with love and affirmation with our own, how do you expect us to be strong enough to go out into the world and fight them? Right? There is a way in which you pass on knowledge. There is a way in which you offer information. There is a way in which you show care and concern for how this movement is growing and moving that doesn't tear down the only thing that is currently trying to fight for black people. Because we got a lot of folks who will sell us down the road for a chance at the White House, for a chance at a 6th or 7th term, for a chance at a check from a funder, from a chance at a meeting with the Koch brothers. We got a lot of people who we've said represent us that do a disservice to us. And we have to be able to find some type of space to become whole, because broken people cannot fix a system, right? Broken people cannot free. I can't break chains if I'm not strong enough. And I'm not strong enough if I can't sit in spaces and feel like, damn, it's always somebody who's like, nah, you know? And it makes you emotional because most of the time, this is not like a lucrative business, right? Like, this is not like the success. This does not promise longevity, right? That this could arguably ruin the rest of our lives. That at some point someone could just decide you're done, right? Brittany can't get a job, right? Like we only got into Wash U because I called Vernon like, hey, I need a next thing, you know, like I have to do something. And it is incredibly difficult to hold emotionally that people who fought before you feel as if though you're not doing enough. Because there was a period when there was nothing. Yeah, that's right. And we could argue that there were still some, you know, that there was still the Malcolm X grassroots movement in Jackson, Mississippi, paving the way for Chokwe Lumumba to be on CNN to talk about why he won't go on the stage with Trump, right? That there was movements happening, but in the way that it is now, that this thing exists because we sacrificed, that your founding date, if I'm not mistaken, is in the year 2014, right? That's when this group was founded. That means it was founded off him sitting in jail for 8 years and us having to take whatever check we do get and give it to him so that he can have commissary while he's in a jail with guards who terrorize him because they know who he is. And we put his picture up on screens because it's cute and it's beautiful and it's a struggle and it's a story that we need to tell, and it's still being told. He's not free. We already have martyrs, and we didn't even get a chance to stand up all the way. We're in our infancy, and we've already had to bury some. We've already had to watch some go away. So just be careful how hard you come down on people who are traumatized that when they walked out of their front doors to say that one man mattered, the response back triggered a lifelong story to tell and experience that is hard. And it is beautiful and it should be retold, but we are still learning. And that requires grace, right? It requires an immense amount of grace to be giving to the next generation to understand when I came out in the 60s, I was not who I am today. That 50 years later, you can give us a critique. We've only been here for 3.
Thank you. This was so rich, so rich. We just have to listen because they told us everything that we absolutely needed to know. And then I hope that you do something beyond that. Read the transcript of this panel. Like, go back and like study what they said. So again, I just want to thank you all for sharing that, and you didn't have to. You didn't have to, but you did. And we're appreciative. So thank you.
Thank you.
Before we do anything else, we're getting ready to break for lunch. But I've told Kayla, Alexis, and Brittany this privately, but I will say it publicly. They are 3 of my sheroes who I followed in Ferguson, and I will follow them again wherever they go, however the movement and the iterations that it forms. We had and have had several conversations to this point. So I'm glad that we were able to bring you here. I'm glad you were able to share that your love for the people, but also your brilliance. And I think sometimes that gets underscored in intergenerational conversations when they should be conversations and not accusatory at times. But thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't think it'll be weeks from now, Burgess and I were talking about, that we'll go back and rewatch this and catch something that you all said. We'll catch something that Dr. Parham said, because I still didn't catch everything that she said, and you didn't either. But with that in mind, Aaliyah, thank you for your questions. But we're going to break for now. We're getting ready to go to Drake's place for lunch. But before that, we would like to take a picture with everyone that's here. outside next to the train car that's out there. For those, should be fun. So for those that are watching online, thank you for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow, same bet time, same bet channel. Hopefully I don't get sued for that, but thank you all for being here, and we'll see you shortly.